But yeah, mouthwashing. How do I describe mouthwashing? How can we... So I'm happy. First off, I'm happy I knew nothing about this game going into it. I only really thought it was gonna be probably a meme game. I thought it was gonna be a meme game, and people that were posting positive things on the internet were kind of memeing or trolling. But I went in and I came out pleasantly surprised, and honestly, if I had to describe it like from an eagle's eye view right now, 30,000 feet into the air, I'd say this is one of the most beautiful, most interesting, and most compelling horror games that I've ever played in my life. The thing about it is that it's set in a kind of this sci-fi kind of situation, right? Where you're in a spaceship and you're basically a freighter ship in a way. This feels like a spaceship. I don't know if it actually is, but it's a freighter ship, right? And the only thing that really has to do with mouthwashing, at least physically in the game, is the mouthwash thing, is the mouthwash item that you're transferring. It's a space freighter. Okay. But I guess in some way, mouthwashing applies to a lot of stuff in the game. Like the whole arc that the characters go through, it's kind of like mouthwashing, right? I don't really want to spoil. I don't really want to spoil a lot. I don't want to spoil anything. In case anybody just came in here and, you know, or is just suddenly tuning in right now. But first off, the game looks beautiful. Beautiful game. Very cinematic, considering its actual, like, technical style, which is this kind of, it's like an upgraded PlayStation 1 looking game. And it goes to show that you can achieve so much even with that kind of style, where you don't need like a billion pixels per character, a billion pixels in your environment. You just need a strong art style and a strong cinematic vision to make something look really, really good. And this game uses a lot of the things that make, you know, those PlayStation 1 games very special, with their fixed camera angles. And it was a walking simulator. And honestly, the place the game was set in, which is this little spaceship, I really appreciated its smallness, because in its smallness and its limitations, you could tell a very compelling story already. You don't need a full open world every time or something like that. So even if it was a walking simulator, my problem with walking simulator is always, it's like, you keep on walking and going places and everything. But this was very tight. It was a very tight experience, right? Yeah, they use like the Dutch angle. They use different, suddenly when the camera changes to a different perspective, you feel it, because you're like, whoa. Because for the most part, you're in first person, right? But then suddenly the camera angles change, and then the feelings change as well. You know, the storytelling changes. It's really good. I really love it. Yeah, for the audio, as you can hear right now, the music is amazing as well. It has this kind of lo-fi meandering kind of slow vibe to it. But more than the tracks, it's the way they use the music. Remember that scene where we were going through a corridor and it wasn't full on like, you know, music with a melody or anything. It was just a swelling of music. And you were just going through the corridor, and I was actually running through it. I had shift pressed. And then you open the door, and then suddenly the music stops. And what is this? Was this intentional? Was it intentional timing for me to just, for it to swell to its peak the moment I touch the door and then suddenly stop? It's so good. every element in this game fricks up your brain. Give the devs so much kudos for it. Yeah, we can also talk about the story without spoiling a lot in case anybody is just tuning in. It's a sci-fi game, right? It's you're in a space freighter, but there are no monsters, there are no ghosts and ghoulies, there are no big enemies like that. There's no enemy, honestly. It very much feels like Alien before you figure out that the alien was there. You know, it's right at that moment before you knew that there's an alien there. It's the tension of just being stuck on a space freighter with other people. It's just that. It's that tension. And it just stays there, right? There is no monster. And one thing I didn't expect, psychological horror. Now, for me specifically, psychological horror, I talked about this before. Psychological horror isn't exactly my most favorite type of horror, because a lot of psychological horror is basically, oh, this all happens in his brain, and then he wakes up and nothing actually happened physically. But the way this game frames when the psychological stuff happens is really cool. There was an actual crash of the ship. The ship actually crashed. And you know, it makes sense. It makes sense that there's suddenly this whole psychological thing going on. What happens after the crash? You're trying to survive. And then depending on what the characters are, who they are, they process it all differently. And it's really good. It's really good. But aside from that, the storytelling here uses the kind of fractured type of storytelling, which can be confusing to some, but I really was not confused at all playing this game, right? Yeah, basically watching someone go crazy in real time. And I really like how it uses, like, oh, this is a few days into the future, few days into the past. This is the present time. It just goes back and forth, where at the very end everything just fits together like a glove. It's really good. It's got a little puzzle that you're trying to fit together. However, in many games, when they present a puzzle like this, it becomes very confusing because, one, maybe they're really freaking long, maybe they're 20 hours long or something, or in others, the storytelling just isn't competent. But for this one, it's in a small space, it's just with a few characters, it's framed with context, with a crash and everything, so it was easy to understand. It's really great. What the heck? Found it easy to follow along. Most of the time I find myself struggling trying to keep up. And you think the big bag would just be the corpo they work for, but no, it all goes back to the guy. Yes, it's a very self-contained small story, with amazing visuals, incredible sound as well, incredible writing, and it all just works. The visuals specifically, especially the horror visuals, you know, the gory, this game is very gory, which, you know, can be hard to digest for some people. That's probably the only thing that may make me not recommend the game if you're like someone who's very sensitive to gore, to kind of like these puking sounds and to that stuff. But I think that's also a testament to how good, you know, the sound design is and the visual design is. There was definitely a puzzle here that you saw earlier that I just couldn't take anymore. It was that kind of like and while some people, you know, of course can't handle that, for me, I think it's definitely a plus to it just because of how really visceral it was. You know, but as long as you get the content warnings in there, I'm sure you can get the right people to play this game. But yeah, I don't know what else is there to say. I was very immersed in the whole story. It was so immersive. It's so good. For 3 hours straight, I was in the Tolplar. I was in it. I lived here for 3 hours. I'm surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm happy. It's so good. But yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful game. Even if it's very heavy, it's still a beautiful game. But yeah, Otsu everyone for being here and watching and joining me on this little 3-hour journey. It was definitely worth it, and I think I'm gonna keep thinking about this game like for years to come. Like I can imagine myself years later being like, someone asked me, "Oh, what's a good game to play? A horror game?" Mouthwashing, easy peasy, right? The title itself is already interesting to begin with, very memorable. Mouthwashing, like what? Yeah, mouthwashing. All right.